Good afternoon. So I want to start by describing a scenario that many of us are familiar with. Senior executive steps on in front of a camera at a large company. The lighting is dialed in. The mic levels are set. Events ready to go live, and everyone's prepared. And whether it's a multi-camera setup with a lot of the cool stuff we're seeing here, or a straightforward webcam sitting on top of a laptop, the production environment has been designed to make the speaker seem credible and convincing. And somewhere nearby in a control room on a monitor or two, the production team sees exactly what they were hoping to create: a high-quality video stream, leaving the building, heading to tens of thousands of employees across the entire enterprise organization. That is not the version that most employees will ever see. What actually reaches people is across a complex corporate network is often much softer, less vivid, and less human than what was originally created. And when that happens, it's not just the video quality that suffers. The message suffers with it. And in a media environment shaped by consumer video standards, that difference has become much more consequential to the business outcomes these events are intended to produce. That is the enterprise video quality gap. And when that gap exists, something important is often lost. A message meant to inspire confidence can sound uncertain. A leader who felt persuasive in a room can seem unconvincing on a pixelated screen. And a communication meant to create alignment can create confusion as it makes its way through a corporate network, leaving the message harder to understand without capturing attention, holding engagement, preserving understanding, and leading to agreement and action. That is what these events, whether they're attended in a room or in front of a screen, have always been about. And that goal has not changed just because the medium has, but once communication depends on video, as it does in a globally dispersed workforce, the quality of that video starts shaping how clearly the message comes through and how much of it survives intact. Clarity lives in subtlety, and in video, subtlety survives only through its quality. My name is Nick Morolda. I'm the Vice President of Service and Delivery at Hive Streaming. And so at Hive, we spend a lot of time thinking about this, about what happens to a video after it leaves the encoder in the control room and gets to the screen where it's ultimately consumed by an employee. But before I get ahead of myself, I do want to take a step back and understand why this gap matters so much. First to the beginnings of streaming itself, and then to the consumer experience that shaped what people now expect from video everywhere, including at work. So let's go back to the summer of 1993, a parking lot in Palo Alto, California, a research facility, Xerox PARC. It's a research facility already famous for changing the direction of modern tech. This is where the same place where the PC mouse, laser printer, and a lot of the other hardware bricks still sitting in our attic first originated. And that is there. What's often cited as the first ever public live video stream was carried over the emerging internet. It was stood up by a kind of an oddball group of engineers and researchers who played in a punk band on the side called Severe Tire Damage. And using an experimental, at the time, multicast platform called the M-Bone, for anybody that remembers, they streamed a live webcast across the early internet, reaching as far away as Australia. I wasn't able to find any footage from that, but this is a still. And I love this, not only as a huge fan of early 90s punk, but because it says something important about the beginning of this medium. It wasn't polished. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't wrapped in fanfare in this press release. It was weird, experimental, and gritty. It was very punk rock, actually. And back then, the achievement was not that it looked beautiful or inspired anything. The achievement was that it moved at all. The point was simple but profound, that live digital video transmitted across the internet as ones and zeros was possible. But nobody comes to video today with the expectations of 1993. They come to it with expectations shaped by the modern internet. And at home, platforms like Netflix, YouTube, and HBO have trained all of us to expect video that is crisp, fluid, stable, and immediate. We expect faces to look like faces. We expect text to be readable. We expect motion to feel natural. And we expect the technology to preserve enough of what's happening in front of the camera that the experience still feels whole and real in front of our screens. And for the most part, consumer platforms have gotten very, very good at meeting this expectation. They didn't just prove that streaming at scale was possible. they turn it into one of the predominant ways people receive information and engage with the world around them. And as often happens with this technology, once people get used to these experiences at home, they start to expect the same thing at work. And this is a well-recognized concept in enterprise technology called the consumerization of IT. We've seen this pattern before with smartphones, SaaS, software as a service, cloud storage, where consumer technology reshapes workplace expectations. And video is going that same way, not because the enterprise and consumer platforms are dealing with the exact same use case, but because consumer platforms have reset what people expect good video to look and to feel like, which means that the enterprise video quality gap, both the gap between what is sent and what is delivered, and the gap between what people receive at home and what they're asked to watch at work, has become much easier to see and much harder to excuse. Now, a big part of why that gap exists is that enterprise networking teams are operating against a very different set of priorities than consumer platforms are. Because these IT departments at these companies are not optimizing for one viewer on one clean connection across a mostly unconstrained internet architecture. They're trying to preserve stability for thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of concurrent viewers spread across a complex and uneven network conditions. They're the ones who have to think about what happens when a bandwidth-heavy event collides with everything else the network's already carrying. So they make trade-offs, they constrain resolution, they squash bitrate, and they design their architecture conservatively. And they build these very sophisticated globe scanning structures, optimized network structures, optimized almost exclusively for operational and financial success, not necessarily because quality doesn't matter to them, but because the environment is always changing and stability is the condition that everything else depends on. So, a softer video is survivable. A video that freezes, buffers, or stutters or fails at scale usually isn't. And the risk that they're trying to avoid is much bigger than a disappointing viewer experience. And the wrong conditions, bandwidth-intensive video, constrain the network, disrupt other critical applications, and create all sorts of operational problems that in serious cases can become very expensive for these companies monetarily. People lose their jobs, which I've unfortunately seen that happen when some of these events go sideways and the network isn't ready for it. So to be fair to IT, which, they can sometimes be a little grumpy, especially towards us production teams, their concerns are not irrational. They're not just protecting the stream, they're protecting the wider business. And that's why this gap is so persistent. There's real friction and real deviation in priorities between the departments responsible for video production and the ones responsible for video delivery. Because on one side, you have the very real need for stability. And on the other side, often the more overlooked side, you have the need to preserve enough of the human signal for the communication to be successful. And that often gets treated as, unfortunately, as secondary when technical teams are forced to optimize exclusively for stability and RIP. And when those things get badly balanced, what's not lost for comms teams is not just fidelity, it's attention, the credibility of the speaker, the trust in the speaker, and the humanity, much of the humanity that makes these events effective. And we know that companies know the value of video, and to varying degrees, especially high-quality live video. Research has shown very clely that employees are much more likely to watch and retain information from real-time video communication than asynchronous email or text-based messaging. For instance, if Lumbergh had been able to have this conversation about TPS report cover sheets over a live stream instead of in a memo, the beginning of Office Space might have played out very differently. So if you're a leader trying to get attention out in the organization about something like a TPS report cover sheet policy, video has a natural advantage. It attracts attention. But research has also shown that poor audio and weak visual fidelity do not just make a video annoying and unpleasant to watch. They raise the mental effort required to follow what is being said. And when that effort goes up, comprehension, trust, and credibility can begin to come down in subtle but meaningful ways. And that is a serious problem for enterprise communication. Because if a leader is announcing a strategic shift, a restructuring, or a difficult decision, or a major change in direction, the organization is not just passively consuming information. They're evaluating conviction. They're evaluating competence. They're really evaluating whether the leader sounds like somebody worth following. But I do want to be clear about one thing, though. I'm not arguing that enterprise video should always be measured against some consumer video standards that are unrealistic and unnecessary in this context. I'm not saying that every CEO town hall needs to be formatted for IMAX for the messaging to be effective. What I'm saying is that it's worth striving for standards that are high enough to preserve the detail required for communication to remain effective. And once you frame the problem that way, as a technical choice with a real business consequence, the conversation starts to change. It stops being about whether a video should look better, and it starts becoming how much of the original communication survives the journey from the camera's lens to the viewer's screen, because that journey is where the compromise happens. And this is where the idea of the enterprise video quality gap comes fully into focus, not just as the difference between what a consumer and workplace experience, but the difference between what those internal production teams capture and what the audience actually gets. So let's go a little deeper into how wide this gap is technically. I'm sorry if this is hard to read. They originally told me I was going to be at the Sphere, but I got bumped for the Wizard of Oz. At home, many people are already used to 1080p at around 5 megabits per second for live video. That's a healthy quality, something that's very aspirational, but reasonable for enterprise video streaming. This is actually aligns pretty closely with, public guidance from YouTube and Netflix and things like that. And I think that's a good benchmark for us to establish this consumer standard here. And also, I'm going to be talking about bitrate. So bitrate, for anybody who might be less familiar, I don't want to make any assumptions, just basically the amount of data used to describe a picture at any given time. Generally higher bitrate means more fluidity in the motion, easier legibility, and overall better detail. Now, a typical internal live event, though, is still stuck at 720p, often with quality levels and bit rates of 1.5 to 2 megabit per second in the unoptimized network, mostly because of IT trepidation. And that is, it's not a made-up number, by the way. Surveys have shown that is about roughly where 94% of enterprises still sit in their streaming quality. So there's a long way to go up, and that's about just doing some bar napkin math, about a 60 to 70% drop off in quality from the consumer experience. Sorry, it's close enough to 6-7. I have to do it. But what really makes this interesting is that in strained network enterprise segments, that quality can fall much further. Often we've seen typically in some areas up to only 360p quality resolution, with qualities of about 500 to 800 kilobits per second. So that is not a subtle difference. That is I would say, a drastic, almost catastrophic drop-off in quality. And that might seem like a lot, but we see this kind of thing often in really fringe parts of network environments, manufacturing sites, oil rigs, call centers, and rural banking locations, environments that for a lot of reasons just often are really, really tight on bandwidth. I'm looking at it now. I don't know what this guy's so happy about. His video probably doesn't look very good. But companies do get a lot of negative feedback about this. And when organizations try to solve this, their first instinct is to reach for, a lot of the stuff we're seeing on the floor here, the fun stuff, better lighting, better microphones, better cameras, the stuff that I've been, salivating over on the show floor for the last couple of days. And professional production equipment has come down in price and become much more accessible, even at, smaller to mid-sized enterprise teams with minimal budgets. And companies are willing to invest in this stuff because they do value the quality of higher video, but without protecting the delivery side too and optimizing the delivery mechanism, which is admittedly much less sexy. A lot of that real value in the investment disappears before it gets to the viewer. So I hope that everybody can see enough of this screen for some of these concrete examples I want to do, but I just want to take a look at what some of these disparities look like in real videos. So there we go. Take a high production value town hall. This is 1080p. This is stock footage that I've compressed to meet the standards we discussed. Same consumer live benchmark that we just established. And the standard that, like I said, while still ambitious, is absolutely attainable for most enterprises. We've, seen at Hive, we've seen plenty of organizations reach this level in a safe and stable way. All right, he's going to stop there. So let's just take my word for it when I talk emotion. More subtlety is surviving. And when you start, especially when you start with a decent camera and encoder, which is what this example used, an auditorium setups like this, I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but higher quality, and higher bit rates means more pixel density. When you're cropping in from the back of a room like this, maintaining that fidelity is super important. As they're zooming and cropping in, you see that the text is still readable. Even the audience reaction shots, when you have the cameras for them, are really effective for capturing the mood of the room. And we've seen customers that go into this, and I always am. It looks like it's stalling out again. That's okay. The same idea applies, that, it sets the context for enterprise viewing, because a lot of people when they're watching remotely, take their cues from people watching in the room. It's the same reason why, late night audiences, late night shows have live studio audiences, and why the older, hackier sitcoms my parents watch have laugh tracks. Now, if you were able to see the 360p view here, you notice a lot of serious drop-off. It looks like our man bun friend is freezing at about the same spot in both videos, so you just have to roll with me on that. But you can see here that how much the text is illegible. I know, this isn't just about quality comparisons, but the point here is that when you're not seeing those subtle micro expressions, the communication suffers a lot. And that's not to say nothing of the audio quality, which is also lost as a part of this fidelity drop-off. But let's take the much more quotidian, everyday scenario of the talking head. I really like this example as we start to see that the details are really coming through. The subtlety around the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, really help communicate a lot of, levity and conviction and seriousness that is important to these communications that are lost. Even and I'm just noticing this now, the subtle grays in the beard have very very meaningful statements about maturity and experience that can really translate to the viewer. Now, some people might not like that their grays are coming through, and they can choose to do that as a grooming decision, but it's not a grooming decision. I feel that should be thrust upon them due to poor video quality. Now, let's look at the 360p version of this. You see that all of that is lost. Everything flattens out. And the reason that this is important is not just because of, this video looks worse. The messaging is less effective. That goes back to what I said before. There's a well-documented field of research called media richness theory that elaborates about how the quality of the medium is. I definitely recommend, looking into this if you're interested in this stuff. Really does have meaningful impacts on the efficacy of the message. But let's make this even realer. At some point during one of these events, your executive is going to start sharing a screen and a slide deck packed dense enough to resemble a 5 by 8 inch takeout menu. And, God bless them. We ask them to not make their slides so packed. They're not going to listen. We should stop designing our workflows around the fantasy that they will. But at 1080p, this still looks pretty good. But if you bring it down again to the 360p, it just falls off a cliff. He might as well have shared this deck with a fax machine. And the impact of that is really, I think, very important. And this is worth repeating, that the more effort that a brain spends decoding a signal, the less time it actually has to decode a message. And I really want to emphasize that, because I think it's a really, this really well documented. And I think it relates to the importance of video quality and communication efficacy. The more effort that a brain spends decoding a signal, the less time it has to decode a message. And when you start thinking about video quality through that lens, the stakes become much clearer. But there's also something else quality communicates from leadership, something much more implicit. It signals care. The lighting and the overall quality and the production standard, all of it can signal that leadership believes that this time matters, that the moment matters. And the message matters, and the audience and their employees are actually worth the effort. And I think that alone creates buy-in. It creates a feeling of being included and considered in the strategy. It says something quietly but powerfully about a company's standards and how seriously it takes itself, both the message and the people receiving it. I think it's an updated version of the big stupid fountains they put in the lobbies. I mean, but with an actual real business outcome attached to it. It is a statement, and I think that it actually is one that the employees are very receptive to. And respond to. Imagine you're on the floor of a call center or a manufacturing plant, working at some remote site somewhere. It's third shift. You're exhausted. Your eyes already hurt from staring at screen underneath fluorescent lights for hours. And now you're being asked to stop what you're doing, Turn your attention to a town hall from corporate, and this is what shows up on your screen. You might be thinking, they spent all this money on an event I can't hear or see, and we still, can't get decent coffee in the break room. You're not just disengaged, you're annoyed. He's not a leader, he's just another empty suit. How receptive do you think you're going to be to message them? And that's really the point of all of this, not just to show that the video quality gap is real, but to show why it matters, who it affects, and how much of a message, and yes, reputation could be lost as this moves through an organization. Again, I'm sorry these aren't playing, but I think you get the general point. Because once you can see that gap clearly, the conversation changes. It stops being about whether a problem exists and about what it takes to fix it. And the encouraging part is about this is there are ways to fix this. We don't have to accept this as a permanent condition of enterprise video messaging and scale. There are ways to use networks more intelligently, distribute video more efficiently, preserve stability, and see the environment clearly enough to act before quality breaks down without forcing the business to choose between quality and stability every time a leader needs to communicate an important or complex idea. What we need is not just better cameras, flashier staging, or louder arguments between production, communications, and IT. We need the ability to see the environment clearly, understand it deeply, and shape it deliberately. And that is how we protect the message. That is how we turn enterprise video experiences from a recurring compromise into a communication system that the business can truly rely on, not just for stability, but for clarity, credibility, alignment, and agreement and action. If there's one thing you hope that you walk away from this from today, and thanks everyone for having a seat with me for a minute. Video communication quality is, I really believe, measured by the amount of humanity or integrity it preserves. And I think that, in spite of my use of the word humanity, AI, avatars, and base content have their own level of humanity that's ingrained into that, the subtle expressions. And I want to close with a story from earlier in my career, because for me, this was a moment that this became impossible to ignore. So I used to run video operations at a large company, and our CIO was a real believer in video. This was before COVID, before video started being recognized as the operational necessity that it is now. He was a true evangelist, and he loved getting on camera. He was talking to employees. He was really good at it too. He was one of those naturally warm, charismatic, and compelling people. He had this really booming Ghanaian accent and voice, and really an expressive and just wonderful guy. In fact, our talking head here was that I created was partially inspired by him. Now, he was from West Africa. He was from Ghana, and he had a very dark skin tone. And for video teams, that can be really tough when the lighting, compression, and color depth and downstream delivery quality are not solid enough to preserve facial detail, because that stuff can get lost more easily on someone like him than somebody with lighter skin. His expression and subtlety was completely flattened out by the time it got to people. The features that made him so compelling in the room were really lost through our constrained network environment, and our IT team was very stingy about bandwidth. And the numbers on our events weren't good. We were seeing steep audience drop-off, weak viewer retention, low average watch times, and poor completion rates. And that was incredibly frustrating for everyone because of how good the presentation looked in the room and how good he looked in the control room, because it was just so sharp. And we tried a lot of things. We did different lighting setups. I think we got 10-bit cameras at the time for better color depth, for more subtlety. And a lot of it helped, and we could always get him looking really good for us, but the analytics and survey feedback didn't move much. As the problem, as it so often is, was on the delivery side. And, so we, showed some side-by-sides, and, got some additional executive champions. And once people saw how much more of him came through in the higher quality version, it became very difficult to argue that the lower quality version was acceptable. And we won. We got the support we needed. We made network changes, and we got the tools and platform we needed to optimize the environment, improve delivery, and protect stability. And then something interesting happened. People started responding differently. In the months after the change, we saw live retention increase by 18%. Our watch time increased by 24%. And we saw a 30% increase in completion rate. In post-event surveys, words like clear and engaging were starting to show up. our cameras, and microphones and lighting didn't change. His style didn't change, and the substance of what he was saying didn't really change either. The only thing that changed was the video quality downstream and what people actually saw on their screens. The pattern became undeniable. And look, I'm not up here trying to use this topic as a backdoor sales pitch for Hive streaming or the products we make. I'm talking about something that I've seen over and over again in the real world as somebody who's spent their career in enterprise video on the operational side and now spends all their time working with video professionals that serve some of the largest companies in the world. And I've seen what happens when a speaker's intent survives the journey from the camera to the screen. And I've seen what happens when it doesn't. And once you've seen that difference enough times, it becomes impossible to keep pretending that video quality is cosmetic. The job is to not just move video across a network without breaking it. The job is to preserve enough of the person and the message and the fidelity of the original production for the communication to actually succeed. And if we fail at that, then all we've really done is spend a lot of time and money delivering a weak version of something that was supposed to be important. And in many cases, undermine the very message we were trying to amplify in the first place. But if we get it right, if we preserve the nuance, the clarity, and the subtle human details that make a communication land, then live video can become what it was always supposed to be in the enterprise, a force multiplier for leadership, alignment, and action. And that is why this gap matters, and that's why it is worth closing. And no matter what new technologies emerge, avatars, AI, whatever comes next, the basic human need underneath all of it is not going away. In large enterprises, most people will still not be in the room where important things are being said. They'll be somewhere else, relying on technology to carry a voice, a tone, a face, an idea, or a decision across a huge global network for a huge workforce. The tools may change, the protocols may change, the interfaces may change, but the underlying challenge is the same. People still need to see and hear one another clearly enough for the meaning to arrive intact. And that's exactly why this matters so much, because no matter how advanced the technology becomes at the point of creation with all the everything we've been looking at, if too much of that person or that signal is lost between the capture and the delivery, then what good is any of this? Why are any of us here? If we're in the enterprise space, what good is a 4K 60 frame per second resolution that's going to get squashed to 500 kilobits per second? I think our job as the people responsible for those of us in enterprise video, for how it's produced, delivered, and experienced remains the same. We got to close the gap. Preserve the humanity and the integrity behind the message and the original signal, and make sure that the video reaches the viewer that's strong enough, clear enough, and convincing enough for that message to be understood, trusted, and acted on. Probably should have landed on a stronger closing, but that's it. Thanks, everyone. So I got pretty well caffeinated before coming up here, so I do have a little bit more time than I originally anticipated. So if anybody has any questions or any... All
right, Nick, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So you make a compelling argument about maintaining quality across the enterprise network. I agree with everything you just said. So what are some of your insights or recommendations insofar as obtaining that information and using that information in real time to ensure that quality?
Well, in terms of how we actually solve this problem, that is what Hive streaming is completely built around. We do that with intelligent delivery mechanisms and optimization, testing services, different ways of configuring the network to work efficiently. That really gets into the how behind all of this, which, I think is an important conversation to have. But in terms of the fundamental problem that we're solving, there are ways to work within existing network infrastructures in a way that's efficient and streamlined, so it becomes a lower lift for IT. That's what we want to try and do, is make this as low touch as possible, so you can focus on the quality of delivery. But there's a number of ways to tackle this problem, isn't there? So I hope that was answering the question, but I'm sure we'll get into them.
I have a question. Can you use the same solution to when you have too good of quality and too high costs. You bring down the costs a little bit with this solution.
Yeah. So what we can do is, in terms of relating it to cost structure and, savings, is we have the ability in our solution to create different quality levels for different parts of the network based on their own limitations. For China, for example, many of our clients and the people using Hive are bringing their quality down a little bit just because of the unique challenges of that area. But the reason that that's important is because historically what has happened is we see these enterprises streaming out to everyone based on the lowest common denominator. So when we can control certain parts of the environment that maybe have a little bit more trouble, we can then therefore rise everybody else as we continue to get those remote parts of the network more aligned. So it really becomes a way of controlling the environment intelligently so you can max out everywhere you can max out. Great. Thanks, everyone.